to do something with Sarah for a long time. So today we are joined by Sarah Lebner from Cooee Architecture. And for those who don't know me, my name is Hamish. I am one of the founding directors of Sustainable Builds Alliance and the director of Sanctum Homes. In the spirit of reconciliation, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to elders past, present and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Now, I did mention that Sarah is with us, and she is the Director of Cooee Architecture, a regional practice focusing on energy efficient, resilient, low carbon homes. Cooee practices throughout the Victorian High Country, New South Wales Snowy Mountains, ACT and surrounds. Prior to relocating, Sarah was the principal architect at Lighthouse Architecture and Science in Canberra with Jenny. Sarah is also the author of 101 Things I Didn't Learn in Architecture School. I'd actually love to get my hands on that. I'd love to read what that's all about.
Send you a copy, Hamish.
Do it. I'd love to read it. A recipient of the 2023 Dulux Study Tour Prize and the Australian Institute of Architects 2020 National Emerging Architect Prize winner. Now, today's webinar is something that I'm quite excited about because I live in a bushfire zone area, and designing and building to bushfire standards can be tricky, and every project has its challenges. So today, Sarah is going to share her insights on how to get started on a potentially bushfire-prone block, how to get a bell rating, what is a bell rating, how to find the right level of bushfire assessor for your project and what to ask them, design and construction principles for bushfire-prone sites, material product requirements for bushfire-prone sites, and I'm sure many, many more. I will give a big shout out to today's platinum sponsor, and that is Hazard Co. We have been using Hazard Co on our building sites for the last 4 or 5 years, and it makes it really easy to manage all your requirements as a builder, to manage health and safety. It's app-driven, it's super simple, and if you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. Now, Sarah, I'm going to throw over to you now because you've got a nice little presentation for us.
All right. Thanks very much, Hamish. Thanks for the invite to come here and speak with everybody today. Can you see my screen okay there?
Yep, we can see the screen. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I know we have a diverse audience here as well today, from architects and designers through builders and trades, as well as homeowners. So hopefully there's something in here for everyone today. We'll be starting fairly broad and narrowing in as we go. As Hamish mentioned, my practice is Cooee Architecture. The word Cooee was chosen because it's a pretty uniquely regional Australian word. It originates from Aboriginal languages, was adopted by European settlers, and is used widely today to call out to someone in a remote setting. We like the idea that we're calling out to regional Australians to join us in working towards low carbon, resilient regional homes and building fulfilling lives within them. And then there's that sort of service area. So we're located here in Corryong at the head of the Murray River, near the Snowy Mountains on Narragansett country. And this is sort of our core service area: Canberra, Wagga, Albury-Wodonga, Snowy Mountains, and a little bit further afield. So that gives you some context. So in Australia, when it comes to bushfire-prone blocks, we always talk about this thing called a BAL rating, and that stands for Bushfire Attack Level. Once you have a BAL rating for your block, we then have the Australian standard AS3959, which is the construction of buildings in bushfire-prone areas. And that's really the Australia-wide construction manual on meeting BAL requirements for a building. This diagram helps you understand a bit of the logic between these seemingly abstract ratings. So there are different elements of a bushfire attack, being ember attack, radiant heat, flame contact, convective heat, and strong winds. And at these lower ratings, you're primarily designing for ember attack, whereas in the higher ratings, you're starting to consider flame and radiant heat. So when you're starting off a project, you'll always check the planning system to see if you are in an overlay zone. You'll be able to turn on this bushfire overlay and it'll show you all the risk areas. But be wary that even if your specific house site isn't touching the overlay, if that overlay is touching your block, then it will probably trigger some bell rating requirements. So here, for example, on our rural block, it's a big farm block. And that yellow dash is the boundary. This little green dot is where our house is. So even though it's not near these areas, it's still triggering that need for us to go through the bell rating process. Once you've worked out you probably have to get a bell rating, it's actually best to just check in with your local council regarding your requirements for assessment. So in some jurisdictions, they offer in-house council bell ratings, or in others, they accept that you can fill out an owner self-assessment kit that then gets reviewed by the local fire authority for lower risk areas. And in some circumstances, you'll just need to go straight to a bell consultant to get a certificate. Some new subdivisions will also come with a predetermined bell rating. So remember that bell rating only refers to the construction material requirements of the building, and you probably also have these other jurisdiction requirements. So for example, in New South Wales, we have the planning for bushfire protection document, this one. And it outlines things like firefighting water reservoir and connection or property access requirements. So these two documents together really create the big picture of compliance for your project. This Australian standard is all about the building itself, and then this is all about sort of siting and requirements there. There are different levels of bushfire planning and design accredited practitioners. It took me a while to wrap my head around this, but it's quite useful to understand. So a level 1 practitioner can do a basic bell assessment and give you your bell rating. A level 2 can, in addition, develop planning and building applications in accordance with regulatory requirements. And a level 3 can develop alternate design solutions, which is what we did for our own house. And I'll give you an example of that shortly. When choosing your site, particularly if you're on a rural area and you've sort of got a site to locate within, unlike an urban block, there are key things to be aware of that will increase or lower your bushfire risk. So vegetation is a very obvious one. And the type and density of vegetation affects the risk. So for example, on our site, this is our house site, we have a grassy woodland to the north, but it is pretty isolated. It's just coming up a gully rather than being attached to the edge of a major forest, for example. You'll also be looking at landscape features where the vegetation or ignition source risk is down slope of the house. Your risk is much greater because fire travels uphill easier and with more ferocity. And aspect and prevailing winds are also worth considering because they can fuel and direct a fire. So for example, if you're in a small valley and the predominant winds always funnel down the valley, that's worth considering. Site access is also a critical consideration. So emergency services must be able to access the building easily and residents must be able to evacuate safely. So generally, you'll need all-weather access, including water crossings. You'll need clearances from overhead vegetation. Typically, you will need secondary access or egress. Egress is the industry word for escape path, and appropriate services. And there will also be requirements of things like turning and passing for emergency services. And here you can see us upgrading our pretty elaborate creek crossing to get to our site. So this is where I want to note that while the rules might look black and white, your response doesn't necessarily have to be black and white. So at our site, according to our state requirement, that default rule would have been that we needed 2 pathways in and out because we are so far from the road. We didn't meet this requirement. We've only got 1 driveway in. So instead we engaged that level 3 consultant who could help us write an alternate proposal. And their proposal was essentially for us to design 1 bell level above what was required and then arguing that this meant that residents or emergency services could shelter in place during a front passing if they couldn't escape via the single access route. And this was reviewed and accepted by our local fire service. Similarly, the turning bays and things, or overtaking bays, don't have to be too intimidating. We didn't have to put any along our road because it's got grazed, dry grassland beside it anyway, so a vehicle can overtake. As we zoom in, you start to consider your asset protection zone, which is made up of the inner zone, the outer zone, and the hazard. So an asset protection zone, it's just a buffer zone, an area of reduced fuel where you keep it very managed, and it's an area where you could backburn, and it's an area where active firefighting can occur. So in other words, we're talking about the defendable space. This space is partially imposed on you, depending on the site conditions and your bell rating, but you can also use it the other way around as a lever to change your rating. So for example, the size of defendable space that we had between our house and that hazard of trees to the north, if we made that bigger, our bell rating went down. As we got closer, the bell rating got higher. Landscaping isn't really legislated, but it is spoken about at every Australian bushfire building conference that I've been to. It's a really critical consideration and ongoing maintenance consideration. With vegetation choice, you want to focus on a few things. You want to focus on deciduous trees, so things that are green during summer and retaining water. You want to avoid plants that shed fuel, like bark. You want to use low flammability mulch. And you want to focus on clumps of garden that you can manage around rather than really long fire runs. So in the house that I currently live in as a renter, it has this line of massive eucalyptus trees that just come right up to the house, up and up slope, and they terrify me. Windbreaks can also be effective as shielding, and there's some basic guidelines on sort of height and distance and species selection. And if you're in more of an urban location, shielding from radiant heat might be a consideration. This is a really big one in house-to-house ignition, and that's in that scenario where usually it's only the sort of outer suburban homes that might have a bell rating imposed on them. But what if one of those houses catches fire and then the next house in from it is right up against a fire risk suddenly? So in a lot of the studies and looking back they've done on 2020 situations, a factor that can help or hinder that is having fences, boundary fences that are fire resistant, such as steel, to stop that house-to-house ignition. Water supply is also critical around your defendable zone, so enough taps with steel fittings to access the whole asset protection zone, a water supply that won't fail if power goes out, and you may consider sprinklers or irrigation as part of your defensive strategy. But as a personal anecdote, our neighbouring beautiful historic homestead burnt in 2020 because the sprinklers weren't turned on. They can also run out of water if they're not reticulating somehow. So this standard AS3959 can only legislate materials, but from a design perspective, I want to point out that simpler forms are usually easier to ember-proof and have less weak points. So less corners, less change of roof pitch, less projections like dormer windows, etc., are always better. Any nooks and joints encourage captured debris or embers. So this house here is the Rosedale house by Thomas Cooee Architecture, which survived the 2020 bushfires. And you can see that it is a pretty simple box. There's a great book by Joan Webster called Essential Bushfire Safety Tips. And in it, she says, a house that will resist ember attack does not need to be complicated. A single story with no ceiling space, strong roof, slab floor, and protected windows will generally be defendable. So the biggest thing I've learned through all my education on bushfire is that by and large, it's about ember proofing. People get really distracted by focusing on fire resistant materials. But as we all know, Even a brick or steel clad home will probably need cavity ventilation. It might have garage doors. It's probably got gutters, all these points that can be an ember weakness. So at these lower BAL ratings, like 12.5 and 19, they are primarily focused on ember proofing at joints, gaps, and openings. So in the Australian standard document, it will state, all joints in the external surface material of walls shall be covered, sealed, overlapped, backed, or butt jointed. And all gaps, including vents, weep holes, and the like, shall be screened, except for weep holes to the sills of windows and doors. This is one of my own details, and obviously it is only for educational purposes. I know for a fact that wouldn't meet a few code things in some areas and circumstances at the moment, so don't blindly copy it. For members of the public, the useful part to notice here is just this orange line representing the ember gutter mesh, which is a critical and common point of ember proofing. Even if you keep your gutters clean, I remember during 2020, just from nearby fires, there was just debris landing all the time. So it's a really common catch point and a weak point. And this is a picture of gutter guard installed on a house. For the architects and builders, I want to point out that there's still a lot of confusion in the industry about ventilated cavity construction, especially if you're doing that approach on the roof, which is a very big rabbit hole that we could go down, but we won't. But for the point of brevity today, I just want to show this detail because a lot of the info you see might push you towards a bushfire blanket type product that just fills any gaps under your roof sheets. Obviously, in that instance, you're going to have ember-proof eave vents or some kind of ventilation through your roof space. But if you're like me and have been in the vapor permeable roof membrane with ventilation cavity camp, you might wonder what your solution is to ember proofing, and I find that gutter guard often is a nifty fix-all there. And I will note, depending on your gutter overflow, you may need mesh behind the gutter if you're doing external brackets with a rear overflow. As the BAL rating increases and we move away from just attention to ember proofing, you get more into those fire resistant materials. And here I want to stress that no material is perfect. Some cladding materials like steel or masonry are an obvious choice over others like timber. You definitely should rule out any gappy materials like roof tiles because of the ember proofing issue. However, AS 3959 still allows for certain species of fire resisting timbers up to BAL 29. Which is most projects, so it has sort of a list of hardwoods. Holistically, consider that smooth, well-maintained timber walls pose less of a risk than rough, weathered timber. So you should also consider the likely aging and maintenance as well. And certain areas are a greater risk. For example, a structural veranda column at the edge of the footpath where it might be near the garden should certainly be steel. Now, remember that material requirements are always about what is exposed and the treatment at the lining. And I'd suggest that focusing on steel framing over timber framing is a really distracting conversation that often happens. Yes, a timber frame would burn better if the fire got into the structure of the house, but usually by that stage, it can access a lot of other flammable items anyway. Steel framed homes do still burn. And people often forget that steel frame homes also run the risk of warping when exposed to strong heat, and partially burnt houses often result in a completely defective steel frame. And that's not even to mention all of the thermal bridging and condensation issues that we have with steel framing in many cooler climates in Australia. I have never done a steel framed house, and I don't think I ever will. AS 3959 allows for, okay, so sorry, we're talking about windows here. So this one gets a bit technical. I'll try and explain it as simply as possible. So AS 3959 allows for these deemed to satisfy provisions. And that just means it says things like, at rating X, this type of window is automatically permitted. But there's also this other code that it references, which is like a fire testing code, AS 1530. So many window companies have tested under AS 1530 to then be rated at a higher level than that deemed to satisfy ruling might say by default. So to put that into an example, at BAL 40, AS 3959 would say would only list metal frames as the default provision. However, certain brands of timber and UPVC windows have been tested to achieve BAL 40 under that AS 1530 provision. So that means that you can use them if they've had that certification and say that they also are okay to that standard. Permanent roll-down shutters or attachable emergency shutters provide protection from wind debris, radiant heat, and ember entry. And if you've got them, you can use standard windows because the shutters are deemed to provide that BAL protection under the code. And a little tip for new players: in high-risk sites, you can work with your bushfire consultant to develop different ratings for different sides of the house, depending on the risk. And for example, with windows, then the requirements might change depending on whether windows are openable or a certain distance from the ground. So, for example, I had a project that was flame zone on one side of the house, but then we got all the other sides were deemed BAL 40, and it is quite a bit easier between BAL 40 and flame zone when it comes to windows. So on that flame zone side, we only had fixed windows. They were a certain distance from the ground, whereas all of our operable windows and sliding doors and things were on those other sides. When it comes to services, any above ground service pipes should be metal to reduce the risk of failure from melting plastic. Static water supplies in metal or concrete tanks should have metal underground pipes. And you'll usually have a requirement to put in a firefighting valve and reserve a certain amount of water on a rural block. And then there'll be a sign so that if the fire truck turns up at your place, they know that they can quickly connect into there and use that water. In terms of gas, a lot of concern has been raised for bottled gas in bushfire-prone areas. In 2020, there were a lot of reports of people hearing gas bottles exploding or seeing them projectile into neighbours' properties. If it's included, gas bottles should be shielded with valves facing outwards and on a concrete pad. And I know the downpipes are a little bit different here. So often we need to use PVC piping to collect our rainwater because it's in a charged system, so there's water sitting in it all the time. You're not required to have steel downpipes, and my personal opinion on this is that unless you're collecting water during a fire event for a circulating roof system, I think that if it gets to the point of the downpipes on your house melting, you've probably got bigger concerns than replacing a few downpipes after the fire event. Maintenance is really critical, and it's important to discuss this with owners in a bushfire-prone area, and that we design to make maintenance easily accessible. Active defence is also a personal passion of mine. And so, of course, I have to stress that planning to stay and defend a building during bushfire requires careful preparation, forethought and resources. Most jurisdictions encourage a written and practiced bushfire plan, and advice from authorities during a bushfire event is usually to leave early. However, in regional areas, many homeowners will prepare for and intend to stay during a bushfire event. So if you're designing for these kind of peoples, there's a few things that came out of studying this defence guideline that you can think about when you're designing. So those things are things like backup power and generators, again, so you're not losing water pressure or communications when the power goes out. Storage for protective gear, consideration of tap locations and hose length, access into the roof cavities with a hose, and the ability to observe inside from every side what's going on outside, as well as the ability to exit the house from every side, which can be through a door or a window. Bushfire bunkers are pretty controversial. Different states approach them pretty differently. Currently, Victoria is the only state that has accreditation for bunkers. So Nigel Bell, who's sort of the industry master of bushfire design, says that there needs to be more understanding of the role good design can play in mitigating risk from bushfires. And I would add that this is equally so for the role of good construction. And I want to finish by highlighting the similarities between approaching energy efficient design and construction and bushfire defensive design and construction. So bushfire defensive homes don't have to be expensive or require expensive technical or material solutions. It's the same for energy efficient homes. Keeping it simple often results in a more defensive home. Smaller, space efficient, flexible homes are more energy efficient and sustainable. AS 3959 is great, but it is only one piece of the puzzle and all tools are limited. I would say similarly for energy efficiency, I think NatHERS and star ratings are great, but they are only one piece of the puzzle. All tools are limited. Holistic understanding of design makes effective outcomes more achievable across both. Projects are not really certified as built. This one often really surprises members of the public. So for both bushfire and energy efficiency, they get checked for compliance at design and approvals. But then when they're getting built, your certifier is really there focusing on, yes, any major changes, if a window's moved, but their primary role is checking that you meet the minimum standards of the construction code. A lot of them really aren't across the details of energy efficiency and bushfire. And there's no testing that happens. There's no one coming out and tracing your ember proofing all around the house, likewise with perhaps your draft proofing. So there's some real similarities there that you need to be aware of having someone to advocate for you in that regard. And following on from that, poor build quality can massively undermine effectiveness for bushfire defensive homes. It only takes one weakness in that ember proofing to let fire in. Poor build quality can massively undermine effectiveness for energy efficient homes. Similarly, you can build a great house, but then if it's drafty, there's no point. So my final words there would be, climate change is locked in and happening. We're tracking poorly on mitigating climate change and therefore increasing weather event intensities and natural disasters. And I think this slide is a great one to finish on to remind homeowners that good future-proof solutions are achievable and that a holistic, motivated project team is the easiest way to achieve them. And finally, if you want any more, we have a healthy set of resources on our website. We post a lot to Instagram and Facebook, and we are slowly getting more active on our YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Ross, is it Ross Caday, the house in Rosedale? That's
Thomas Caday, yes.
Right, yeah. So that's just down the road from our family beach house, and I remember actually going for a drive through Rosedale and Gorilla Bay area the year after the bushfires went through the south coast there, and I remember clocking that particular house and thinking to myself, that right there is a well-built house, really simple form, and yeah, not much of a chance of that one burning down. Although understanding the ferocity of the fires through that particular section there, I think they were also pretty bloody lucky as well. I've just got a couple of notes here, and I just want to I guess your thoughts on them. Do you think insurance companies are probably going to want to have some kind of as-built verification moving forward, or are they just not going to insure homes in bushfire areas? I know you can't really speak on behalf of the insurance companies, but that to me would be
just opinion. I don't think they will, because I think insurance companies also don't understand that there's not as-built verification happening. I think if the public don't know, they don't really know either. Maybe that's underestimating them, because I know insurance companies are leading the way on sort of projecting climate and risk. But when it comes to buildings, I suspect that they would see the design and certified BEL rating and energy efficiency rating and just assume that's what happens.
So, in summary, we need to have as-built certification for all our buildings because then it ticks all the boxes. It ticks your
Well, look,
BEL, it ticks
I'm
your.
actually really torn because, often we talk about this in energy efficiency, and wouldn't it be great if you could do some draft testing? But the reality of that, I just can't see happening. I work in so many areas where even getting an engineer out to site is a massive cost and really hard. There's not currently enough testers. So at the moment, I'd just rather let people know that that's not happening, so the people that really care about it can opt in rather than enforcing it and making it something that perhaps becomes one more challenging cost tick for people in remote locations on tight budgets, as an example.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I guess you're close to the coalface of regional construction, whereas, here, we've got a dozen different engineers or surveyors that come out and check our projects. So it
Mm.
kind of makes
The,
sense. I guess
the
this is
easy
where.
one to add to that would be point of sale. Sorry to interrupt there, Hamish.
No, that's
Having lived in Canberra, where star ratings at point of sale were compulsory for years, the level of community understanding around star ratings was incredible because everyone knew, because every house that was sold had to have a rating. You didn't have to reach a certain rating for sale, you just had to have the rating. So the community knowledge around that was great. And then I came over to New South Wales and no one had any idea what I was talking about. So this gets spoken about a bit at the Australian Bushfire building conferences about whether for certain blocks you have to sell them with a rating again. So there's that build up of knowledge and that transparency.
I'm just going to be quite selfish before we get on to these other questions because I've got some questions here that I'd like answered. Um, Hopefully, they're also educational for the other people that are here as well. You talked about landscaping before, and I know you and I had a quick chat about this when we first started talking about this webinar. Can landscaping affect your BEL rating? Like, could you change like topography or something else around different elevations of your property that could change BEL ratings if you were, say, in a and I'm not saying let's just raise every single tree because we don't want
Yeah.
to do that, but can we make tweaks to our landscape that could help us with getting our bushfire to a more manageable level, say from about 40 down to a 29 or something like that?
Yeah, it does happen a lot, and there are a lot of high risk areas where they then turn to clearing. But different states then have different levies and sort of payments that you pay for clearing. There's I can't remember the term. I think they're different in every state, but there's sort of these landscape offset fees. So you have to be really careful about that and understand what the situation is in your area from council first of all. Um, Landscape and maintenance are two big areas that the industry is aware of as an issue. And I know with maintenance, for example, they were bringing in a maintenance code for bushfire. I'm not sure if that's out yet. It should be imminent. But the idea was that you had to maintain certain things like your asset protection zone, because you could obviously get a house approved and then go and plant all these trees that just massively increase your risk. The other thing that's really been nice out of going to the bushfire building conference a couple of times is that across the board, from everyone, from firefighters to designers, no one wants to see everyone building houses with no vegetation around them. Everyone's really aware that it's sort of a holistic problem, that we don't want to sort of exacerbate climate change in our efforts to build defensive homes. So there was there's a nice synergy between just finding the good ways to do it. You can still have a beautiful, leafy, lush block and garden. It's just about being really sensible about how you're doing it.
And if I could throw some advice into there, and I guess this is sort of closer to home for me because my wife works for a landscape design company. You
Mm.
can design for a bushfire zone. You can have a beautiful garden that is, low combustion and it's still beautiful and you can still bring nature in. You can still have biodiversity in a fire resisting garden. So yeah, don't just have lawn around your house. You can still bring the birds and the bees in. And before we jump on to these other questions that are in the chat, is it true or not true that anyone, like a building designer, sorry, a builder, I could do a bow for someone like a bushfire rating, or does it have to be done by someone who's qualified?
So it goes back to that depending on what the requirement is for your site and your council. So a lot of projects I've worked on in New South Wales, you can fill out the sort of the assessment kit, and the owner could fill that out. I could fill it out. Whoever it gets submitted to council with the development application, and then the local fire authority checks it and gives out the rating. That's quite a common process. But then there's other situations where I think you would be required to get the assessor in where they're higher risk areas as well. And there's certainly projects where if they are higher risk, I always encourage people to get the proper rating done anyway.
Does that, I know because we live in a bushfire management area, does that mean that you're going up to that next level of assessor?
So that first level of assessor can give anyone a rating. That's the main part of their role. They're just giving you the certificate that says your house is this. That second level of assessor, they're doing that extra piece of compliance work that says the house will be built to whatever, and these will be the features. So I've got an assessor on a project at the moment that has done that, and that was a bit of a learning curve for me because I'm used to doing that. So I guess it can be a bit of a balance of, again, who's just supplying the service. I was quite happy to sort of write that compliance. But the real difference for me is that difference between the 1 level and the 3 level, because that 3 level person can actually propose sort of a practical alternate solution, which I think is a really nice system to have. You've got your default easy rules that you can get through quicker if you go with them. But if you want to think outside the box and do something different to those, just get the people with the right knowledge in to write a plan, and then they'll think about approving it.
I think of that as like the same approach as when you're getting performance solutions. I mean, every project needs a performance solution
Yeah.
now. It's just about engaging the right person with the right amount of knowledge to then authorize or approve a particular thing. And I guess it would be the same if you were talking about getting an expert in that knows about bushfires. I know we use Nexus planning for a lot of our projects here in Victoria, and the information that you get from them is awesome because they're thinking that you don't want to stop people from building, but you also want to protect their houses as well. And as a homeowner, you 100% don't want your house burning down. But if it's a difference between getting like flame zone windows or Bau 40 windows, there's a massive price in that. So yeah, it's worthwhile looking if you are building or designing to look into these professionals and using their services. Now I'll stop hogging all the questions. I'll stop being so selfish. I've got a couple here. So is the Australian standard referenced by the NCC or some other legislation? Just wondering what triggers it.
Yes, there is an overlap where the NCC will call it up. I can't exactly tell you the pathway there. What will really pull you up will be when you go for that council ruling, and they'll be the ones that sort of say, no, you're at this level, or you're in a risk area, so you have to get a certificate and address it. But particularly with the changes in the NCC having the recent big shake-up, I couldn't tell you exactly how it's referenced in.
And I might just add another question to that. And you bring up councils and you bring up, I guess, local overlays on properties. And I know you did touch on it in your presentation, but I know, and again, particularly in my area, the local fire authorities really have the final say at the end of the day. Could you
Yeah.
maybe, and I know you talked about like truck access and all that kind of stuff, but could you maybe
Yeah.
just maybe unpack that just a little bit more, just so people can understand, like really understand that?
Yeah, so you put in your development application to council, which has all your usual stuff, but then we'll also have your extra layer of bushfire information and your bell rating. It's not council that then sits there and looks at it and says, oh, yeah, it's fine. It gets referred to your fire authority. So in our case, the CFA. I had a case recently where the DA was a bit overdue and they were like, yeah, we finished it all. We're just waiting on that certification or endorsement, I think they call it, from the fire authority. So that is a good point to point out. It does actually get sent out to the right people to check that.
Yeah, and you got to remember that these are the people that, in the event of a fire, are protecting life and protecting property. So you
Yeah.
kind of want to listen to them. You know,
Yeah.
you want to
I think
make
it's a
sure that
nice
they're.
system in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that it's nice taking it out of the council because sometimes they're so used to just looking at a box and not the reality. So bringing the
Yeah.
CFA in, you can actually talk to. I was about to say you can talk to real human beings. Not saying that councillors aren't real human beings, but sometimes. Anyway, I hope there's no councillors here. I think it's a nice way to do it. I agree with you. Um, Brian's got a great question. In bushfires and areas, can't we just get rid of gutters?
Yes, that is a common approach. Some jurisdictions you will be required to collect roof water, rainwater. I know I had a project in the ACT. If we weren't collecting a certain amount of roof water, we had to instead install a grey water system because it was sort of just they were just trying to lift their water management across the board and resources in that area. So you have to just check for any jurisdiction requirements on that. But as far as I know, the National Construction Code doesn't actually require having gutters.
Right. I mean, I think like in our, in a warming climate, we're going to want to be harvesting rainwater. So yeah, it is
Yeah,
an interesting one.
there are other ways to
Um,
do it. I know that Owen and Bobby, I'm not sure if either of them are here, they did a house in the Blue Mountains that was in quite a high risk area, and they had no gutters on the roof, and then the rain dropped and they had a really big gutter sort of halfway down the wall and was quite easy to access and clean out. So you can get creative.
yeah, I was thinking maybe like a ground level, like water catchment area would be pretty cool too. I guess this is like from a designer's point of view, which would be quite exciting because you can kind of think outside the box, still harvest rainwater, but meet these compliance in a really like architectural interesting way. All right, so this is from an anonymous attendee. So just to clarify, when you mention materials, are these restrictions in place to stop the structure burning down or give the people time to get out of their home, or neither?
Mm. That I don't know if this will directly answer your question, but when we were talking before, I thought of something I should mention, which is that the bell rating, and there's a lot of science behind the bell rating levels, and that's why those numbers are seemingly obscure to us. A home that's designed to its bell rating, it's not designed to survive a bushfire. It's actually deemed a success if it protects human life for the extent of the bushfire. So technically, they would deem the bell rating correct if the fire event's gone through, but there was one little corner on fire and it did eventually burn down, but everyone survived. That would be deemed to have been a success. Which is why, if you think back to our project, if it's about being able to shelter in place, that's why we went to one level above to create that extra level of protection. Yeah, I'm
Have
not.
you have you built your house yet, or
No, we
you?
haven't started yet.
Yep, yep. Oh, there's a couple of other questions here. I'll get through these first. Brian again. Brian always loves asking questions. He's a chatty Irishman. He goes, I may have missed this, but who's responsible for the initial implementation of these items? Is it the designer, architect, or the certifier at certification stages, or the builder at construction stage?
Yeah, you have to prove it at design stage. So when you're going through all your approvals, there's different things at both your design approval, development approval, and your construction certificate, building approval, building permit, whatever state you're on. So usually, because I work across 3 states, so the processes are all slightly different, and it absolutely melts my brain. But usually at that first design stage, that's when you have to prove that you've worked out what your bell rating is, and that you're showing things like access. You've got notes in there that you're going to have the tank water. I guess a lot of development application is from that siting and feasibility point of view. Council wants to know that they'll be able to service it, for example. Then when you get to your construction certificate, building approval, building permit, that's when they'll need to see the specification on things like how it's detailed, where the ember screening is, what all the materials exactly are. Then that gets signed off. And then, as we discussed, the certifiers are checking that you're building to what's there. But I think anyone in the industry knows the reality of the extent and even just the time and sort of resourcing that certifiers have to check every last detail. Most of them are just focused on minimum compliance, and they don't have specific training in how ember proofing works, for example. So I wouldn't say that they're not checking off compliance. You're not getting any kind of building official in there to sign off like you do for a electrical inspection or plumbing inspection. So it is really just up to knowing that you've got a builder doing the right thing, and hopefully a good certifier helping, and maybe even the designer involved helping out as well.
Yeah, and I think that probably, really drills down onto a, narrative that I've had for many years. I'm sure you do as well. It's like that collaboration during the design phase with everybody is so critical, and finding a builder that actually gives a shit, really, because you can find a lot of shit builders out there who just want to build to code. So it's finding someone that's engaged. This is again from an anonymous person, and I'll get some. I think your friends are here, by the way, Sarah. They're in
I once put the link in for that house with the big gutters. So
yeah.
if you want to check it out, you can check it.
If projects are not really certified as built, what would you suggest from a contractual perspective to address this, or what do you do to help ensure the build quality is adequate and to expectation?
Well, I'm an architect, so I would say have your architect involved during construction.
I knew you were going to say that.
I'm doing contract admin on a town community hall at the moment that's designed to be a registered safer space. And just last week I was there on site, and in a lovely collaborative way, because this builder is on the ball and excellent, but we're doing the walk around together, and I'm just helping him check, have we screened those vents? Have we put that in? Oh, there's a bit of a gap here. We might need to put some extra material in there. But it always just comes down to having a team. I guess if you don't have an architect or designer there advocating for you, you need to be confident that you can ask the right questions just to check with your builder. I don't see why you couldn't engage your bushfire consultant to come in and do an as-built check. I'm sure they do that as well, which might be a good approach as well.
Yeah, I think going back to your point of the resource that are involved into checking this stuff, and again, the only parallels I'm drawing at the moment are when you're getting a project certified to passive house standards. I know the extra costs and labour and consultants that are involved in that. It could potentially get prohibitive in expenses. So, if you are a homeowner, self-education is like first and foremost what you've got to do. Like actually know what you're looking at when you go to site. And as you said, if the designer's drawn it, they're the ones that should be coming to site to help you out. Now, there is a bunch
Yeah.
of chat here. I don't know, sir, if you want to filter through some of this because they look like some of your.
There was a really
Uh,
good question about renovations that I wanted to
yeah, I
answer.
saw that. Yeah, I saw that one.
Um, because they've just made a really sensible change in this regard as well, as far as I know. So at first they were saying, oh, you're renovating and everyone might know when you're doing more than 50%, then you're required to bring a whole building up to a certain upgrade. But if you're doing less, you can end up in this really funny pickle where the new little bit that you're doing has to be BAL 40, but then you've got this old sunroom out the back that's BAL 0. And how does that work? And obviously, that's just there's absolutely no point because the fire would just come in the risky spot. But my understanding is that they've rethought that and taken a practical approach, and you are asked to upgrade the whole building to a lower level. And it'll be one of those ember proofing ones. And ember proofing's quite easy to do in retrospect because it's really just sort of screening things. So that's quite a practical outcome.
Yeah, that's a much more sensible approach. I have been on projects where there's been a tinderbox at the front and we've done an extension at the back to like BAL 29, and just like, well, what's the point?
Yeah, what's the point?
Um, okay, so just a couple of questions here, like talking about maintenance is sexy about the gutter
Oh
cleaning
yeah,
on this project that's here.
that's Owen and
So this is
Bobby's
from
tag.
Just from Luca. Could you please tell me more about the water tank system to be used?
Okay, so I'm not sure if you mean the dedicated fire supply. So on all rural projects that have a BAL rating, you have to have a dedicated static water supply. So all that means is you have your tank, and then it might be 10,000 litres, 20,000 litres, or 40,000 litres, depending on your state that you're in and your rating. So your firefighting outlet goes at the bottom of the tank, and then your house outlet for your house water is up above that static supply. So your house water is never using that critical reserved supply. And then if firefighters come in and need to connect to it, they can connect and use that bottom amount. If you're talking about sprinkler systems, there's quite a few different ways. There are ones that are on roofs and get caught by gutters, and I guess the bonus there is that you're recapturing and recirculating, but they don't protect what's underneath. So what's actually more effective is ones that are coming off eaves and sort of spraying down around the house and stopping ember coming in. But by and large, I think they should be seen as a last resort. Like, I think they might come into play. So if you're up in the Blue Mountains and you've got a big old house and really upgrading it would be impossible, then maybe you're looking at a sprinkler system. As I said, you've got to be confident that either someone's there to turn it on or it will come on when it's needed to. Yeah, you've got to be confident that they'll work when needed.
Eve has just asked if this has been recorded, and the answer is definitely yes. So we'll have that up in a couple of weeks. This is an interesting question about gutter guard because I personally hate it because I think it does make it incredibly hard to clean. But I think if I had the option of making it tricky to clean or having my house not burn down, I know what I'd probably choose. But yeah, I know you did talk about some other options other than gutter guard.
Yeah, so I've gone around a bit on gutter guard as well. I remember we had a plumber come in and talk to us several years ago. I remember him saying he hated it because it meant people did no maintenance on their gutters, and you do still need to flush out some of the sediment that gets through. And I know that Owen's comment about still being collected. What really changed the game for me was being there during the 2020 bushfires and seeing at my parents' house that even though their gutters were clean, just the amount of debris that was just falling day and night from the surrounding fires made it pretty impossible for them to keep it maintained. In that instance, we had blocked the downpipe so that we could fill the gutters so that they had a bit of water so that anything falling in wasn't going to ignite and go up under the sheeting. And you can get a really neat valve that fits on your downpipe. So if that's going to be your approach and you're planning to stay and defend, it's a little valve and you can turn it, close off your downpipe, put a sprinkler on the roof and fill your gutters up. So you could do that. But by and large, 90% of our clients are doing ember mesh, and I'm putting it on my own house. So ask me in 5 years what I think about it, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's going to come down to, like, if you are in a really high bushfire prone area, I think you just got to make the decision of what's best. Where was your parents' house?
Here where we are now, so it was just before we had moved, so in
Yeah, okay,
New Corrion.
awesome. I'm going to finish up there because it's almost 6:30. Thank you so much for coming on, Sarah. Like, super informative, and I'll definitely be looking back on this one because I think it's super interesting. And the bushfire, like building to bushfire codes, is certainly something that comes up all the time. And speaking of children that are coming in, my two boys have now
You found
come in
one.
to say good day. One of them wants to come up and say hello. So there's Phoenix and Darcy, everyone. So I want to thank Sarah, especially for coming on today, and to all our platinum sponsors, thank you as well. We have so many amazing events planned for this year. The one that we've got coming up in June is going to be performance engineering. I get a lot of personal questions on my Instagram page about uncoupled slabs and how we're managing thermal bridging, but how we still make sure that the house stays up. So that one is going to be a really great one. That one's going to be a live event in Melbourne, but don't stress, we are going to record it. All our webinars and all of our events are going to be recorded. If you don't already listen to the podcast, Simon and Brian have interviewed, I think it's Jake from Carpentry Australia on the recent one, and that's a really great resource for all you builders and carpenters out there. And yeah, I'm going to go because my kids are now creating a huge amount of noise behind me. But anyway, this is going to be recorded, and we are going to post it up on our YouTube channel in the next week or so, and it's going to be on our website. So if you haven't checked out the sba.com.au, please be sure, go and get all the free downloaded resources, sign up to our newsletter because there's some amazing information that comes out every month. And we also do a bi-weekly builders tip that's pulled straight out of Jeremy's brain on that roadmap to carbon zero. So thanks everyone for joining. Sarah, thank you again. And I'll
Thank
no
you for
doubt
having
you
me.
and I
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, awesome. All right, thanks everybody. We'll catch you later. See ya.